is a bit strange at first for Kirby's Adventure to be released on the NES in 1993. Less than a year after Dreamland's completion, a sequel on the SNES would have been the most logical option, considering it was already an established platform with a solid library. But HAL, the company responsible for developing, was on the verge of bankruptcy and needed a new Kirby game made as quickly as possible to be released on the market, and as such didn't have the resources or time to make a proper SNES title. Since the developers at this point were very familiar with the hardware, they could take advantage of it to make one of the best looking games on the NES. Graphics are colorful and well animated. Everything had the same expressiveness as the original Game Boy, but obviously in color and more detail. Some of the backgrounds are even animated, something that to my knowledge might have been uncommon for NES titles. Some enemies look like their Game Boy counterparts, including Kirby himself, but still, the game looks a lot more alive, if there's a way to say it. Hey, now Kirby's actually in color. Guess we know who won that argument. The game itself has an aesthetic that sells this dreamlike world. Each door leads to another room, and a lot of times, these rooms have different backgrounds and something look like they take place in different worlds. It might appear disjointed, but in a dream you jump around places that aren't solid, tangible, or coherent. And considering this is Dreamland, I think it can work quite well. There are only a few caveats with this game looking as good as it does. Firstly, the frame rate is prone to dipping when there's a lot of sprites on screen, especially when using certain abilities like Spike or Ice or Fire, or simply when there's a bunch of enemies. It can mess with the gameplay, especially with other control quirks, and it's in my opinion the worst aspect of this game's presentation. Another aspect that isn't as detrimental to the gameplay, it's just an odd detail, is that at the left edge of the screen there's a column of pixels that sorta give up. It's just an odd graphical quirk that the Edge has this. I'm not sure if any other games have this, maybe it's a common occurrence and I'm just a dipshit. There have been some improvements with Kirby's movement, so let's start there for the gameplay. Kirby can still walk with same speed and fly, though it's a bit slower here. But the pace of the moment-to-moment gameplay has been increased significantly with the inclusion of a dash and slide. You can run by double tapping either left and right, and you can turn while still running. You will only stop running if you let go of the direction you're running in, or if you fly, cancelling the momentum you get when you jump while running. There's also a slide maneuver you can perform by crouching and pressing the jump button. This isn't as big of an addition as a run, since it isn't as useful, but it works when there's a court filled with destroyable blocks or to dodge certain boss attacks. These additions make the game have a much quicker pace than its predecessor, and that's aided by the inclusion of copy abilities. Now, Kirby was from day one designed to welcome newcomers, people who are either young and just getting into gaming, or people who fall into World 1-1 pits. But even back in the day, Dreamland faced some criticism for being too simple, which yeah, it is. Even being a fun and brief platformer, the game was like a tortilla. It's edible on its own, but it needs something to make it truly come into its own. It needs meat. Gallo salchichón. Enter the copy ability system. Aside from inhaling enemies using them as projectiles, pressing down on the D-pad will allow you to copy that enemy's ability. Now, not every enemy has an ability to copy, but there is a solid selection of them to keep the gameplay varied. About 25 abilities. Pretty good for a first outing. Beam shoots a beam whip that has good coverage in front of you. Fire is simple, you shoot fire. This and the other fire ability, Fireball, can light fuses for cannons. Ice is simple, you shoot ice. This ability can freeze enemies and by touching them you push them towards other enemies. Spark is an electric ability with 360-degree coverage. Makes it a pretty good ability, but it also tanks the frame rate. Cutter makes you shoot a spinning blade that comes back at you like a boomerang. Sword is one of 3 melee weapons. It is a simple sword that swings pretty fast. Hammer is a second melee weapon. It's mostly a cosmetic change from the sword, except that it can destroy some blocks that the sword can't, which is why I think Hammer is superior. Parcel is the third melee weapon. Aside from whacking enemies, it can protect you from encountering enemies or hazards from above. Wheel turns you into a wheel and makes you go really fast. I have a small nitpick about the wheel. There are sections where you can use it and it's a section of the level specifically made for it, but since you can jump while in wheel form, it does hinder its ability to make even more interesting sections, because as it is, it only really tests you when you have to turn this one time, and it's pretty fun, but could have been even more. Tornado makes you spin like a blade and by pressing B repeatedly you can ascend a bit. Fireball is a flame and dash. It's kind of redundant since there's a fire and fireball, but I do like this ability more than fire. Freeze is kind of like Spark, but it freezes enemies. Like Fireball, it's a bit redundant. Kinda wish they were 2 moves for the same ability. With laser, you can shoot a single laser that bounces off slopes, works for tighter spaces. Stone turns you into a rock. It can also push the switches that the hammer can press, while doing it with a less effective offensive ability. Needle turns you into a living cactus. You push out spikes and it gives you a similar coverage as Spark or Ice without tanking the frame rate. High jump makes you do a super jump that can also destroy blocks or enemies. It's a bit more situational. Backdrop takes out your inner wrestler. You dash forward and grab an enemy, and depending on the direction of the D-pad you press, it'll give you 3 different attacks. It's a bit unique because of that. Zero is kind of a regular variation of the regular suck, since you can aim it in 8 directions but you can't also move. It's only really useful for a single puzzle. Crash is a single-use screen nuke. It does a lot of damage, but I've only really found it useful when fighting the double Poppy Bros Senior. Mike is another screen nuke, but instead of a single-use powerful attack, it has 3 uses that are less powerful, and I find him just as practical as Crash. Light is also single-use, but extremely situational. It's only to light dark rooms, of which there are 2. It doesn't even damage enemies. Sleep is special in the fact that it does jack shit. It just puts you asleep. I would say it's the worst ability because it doesn't really have much use, but come on, it's adorable. Oh Ball, you special little piece of shit. Ball sucks. Not even the haha Kirby sucks way. It just does. It isn't very useful in control like garbage. It's easily my least favorite ability. UFO is a special ability. It's very rare and a bit hard to get since unless you have hindsight you won't know exactly when the UFO will enter the screen and hit you, losing the chance to get the power. You also can take it to other stages, but it's pretty overpowered. Better flight and a chargeable laser, a beam like the beam ability, and it does a lot of damage to boot. And finally Star Rod, which is exclusive to the final boss. You can shoot stars and do a spin jump, more on it later. That's a pretty healthy selection for the first round. Even if a lot of them aren't really winners or useful, most of them bring much needed variety and replay value to the game. You could try to hold on to a copy of ability as long as you can, defeat a boss with reserve power, or simply train it out in different scenarios. It's Kirby's more recognizable feature for a reason. Minus the hats. In this game, aside from having a different shade of pink, you don't have any visual indication that you have a copy ability, unless it's a weapon like hammer, sword, or parasol. Now, I don't think this is that big of a problem, since I doubt you'll forget the ability you have when using it frequently, and below the screen there's a heads-up display where you have Kirby's health, the boss's health, a score tally, lives counter, and a small illustration that shows you the copy ability that you currently have. Or it can change when Kirby gets hit, gets the invincibility candy, clears the level or boss, etc. Another aspect about the copy abilities I haven't mentioned is that if you saw 2 enemies that have copy abilities, you activate Mix, which is basically getting a random copy ability, which will happen very rarely and it isn't that practical. It's just something that can happen once in a blue moon. Now, do I think the copy abilities succeed in their purpose, adding spice and replayability to the game? Well, yeah, of course, but difficulty is still low. Not a problem for Kirby, of course, and the game is designed with these in mind, not only for the action platformer part of the game, but also to solve puzzles for completion. But the game is still plenty beatable with just sucking and spitting enemies like in Dreamland. Even bosses are designed for that, and that's also because if you get hit once, you lose the ability. I think this is fair punishment for slipping up and getting hit, but just once is too much. Sometimes you'll need to take a copy ability to somewhere in the level and you just get hit once because of Kirby's wacky movement and whoops, there it goes. Do it again, jackass. I haven't touched the sword yet, have I? Well, here goes. Light years away, on a tiny star not visible from Earth, is the magical, peaceful place known as Dreamland. The beings that inhabit this wondrous world live in a blissful existence that centers on eating, sleeping, and playing. An example of their carefree customs include a traditional after-lunch feast nap. After they awaken from their nap, the Dreamlanders discuss their dreams and fervently hope that each other's fondest wishes come true. One day, a young Dreamlander named Kirby awoke from his after-lunch nap feeling terrible. What happened? He wondered to himself. I didn't have any dreams during my lunch nap. This lack of dreams left Kirby feeling very uneasy. After talking to some of his friends, he found that the problem was much more serious than he had thought, for they had not experienced any dreams either. Something must have happened to the Dream Spring, they exclaimed in unison. The Dream Spring is a magical well that is a reservoir for all the dreams of the inhabitants of Dreamland. Dreams also flow out of the Dream Spring and envelop Dreamland, granting all sleeping beings enjoyable dreams. Legends told that the Dream Spring was created by a magical artifact known as a Star Rod. The sparkling star on the tip of the scepter was an actual fragment of a star that had landed in Dreamland in the distant past. The Star Rod now provided energy to the Dream Spring and served the very symbol of Dreamland. The lack of dreams made everyone in Dreamland feel restless and irritable. The joyful laughter that had once resounded throughout Dreamland could no longer be heard at all. Things were bleak. Kirby, the roly-poly hero of Dreamland, boldly announced his intention to investigate the Dream Spring and find the cause of all this trouble. Upon reaching the Dream Spring, who did he find but King Dedede bathing in its magical waters? In the past, see Kirby Dreamland for Game Boy, King Dedede had caused mischief in all of Dreamland by stealing all the Dreamlanders' food and sparkling stars. In place of the Star Rod sat Dedede, covered in bubble bath. "So you're up to your old tricks again, eh, Dedede?" accused Kirby. "What are you talking about, young pudgeball?" Dedede looked surprised. "I thought I'd do everyone a favor by—" No. Kirby shook his head. "I won't listen to your tricks. What have you done with Star Rod?" "Oh, that old thing," Dedede said nonchalantly. "I broke it into 7 pieces and gave each piece to one of my friends." What was Dedede thinking? Kirby wondered. Before hearing any more of what Dedede had to say, Kirby set off on a long trek to gather the pieces of the Star Rod and return them to the Dream Spring. Hopefully he could return the sparkle to the Dream Spring so that the people of Dreamland could again enjoy their happy midday naps. Now that's just what's in the manual, which most people nowadays won't be checking, but in the game it's much more brief. One day, the peaceful life of Dreamland was shattered by a mysterious crisis. The inhabitants didn't dream. On the edge of Dreamland, dreams and hopes once gushed forth from the Dream Spring, fueled by the Star Rod. Investigating the Dream Spring, Kirby found naughty King Dedede swimming in its magical waters. Dedede had broken the Star Rod and given the pieces to his friends, who were now hiding in Dreamland. To bring back the lost dreams, Kirby sought the Star Rod. I mean, that works. That's a premise, and a lot of people probably don't even know what. And a lot of people don't even know that this is the game's story, unless you stick around the title screen, or probably the manual. But for an NES platformer, it's more than enough, I think. Getting into the levels, there are 7 levels now, plus the Fountain of Dream, which is more so final boss level, but they now pack multiple stages each, plus the boss stage. Each level isn't really tied to an aesthetic. This isn't like a Mario game where there's a fire world, an ice world, desert world, etc. Like I said, here there isn't a common theme even inside stage at times. This, again, might give the game a disjointed feel, but this helps bring a lot of variety in level design. Even the fact that you can float over everything doesn't affect that much. The game incorporates a hub world. There isn't anything to do aside from running around and entering doors to get into stages or minigames, but the attention to detail is commendable. It isn't like other hub worlds where you waste a lot of time getting from place to place. Returning from Dreamland are the level intros, which again are extremely cute. The 7 levels are as follows: Vegetable Valley, Ice Cream Island, Butter Building, Grape Garden, Yogurt Yard, Orange Ocean, Rainbow Resort, and the Fountain of Dreams, which is final boss territory. Now, I don't think there's much of a point in describing each level, it's mostly just gameplay. Like playing a Mario level, but not as vanilla, I find. There aren't many set pieces, it's just like a straight line most of the time, like difficulty. The challenge comes from 100% the game. I'll get to that later, sit your ass buddy. In the game there are 2 types of bosses, the mid bosses, which can be found in stages, and then the main bosses, which I'll cover shortly. The mid stage bosses are simple affairs, and will give you a copy ability and only have a couple of attacks that are fairly easy to read. Hardest one is probably the turtle, I find, but even then it's not that hard. Some of these have exclusive abilities, like the hammer, backdrop, and throw. Each level ends with a boss stage, which can be a bit easier because of the addition of the copy abilities. As a great example, and the first boss to start off things with Woods. It speaks for itself, I think. It's pretty similar boss fight to Dreamland, but, you know, more unfair, you can believe it. The paint roller is pretty simple, just jumps between 4 canvases and paints an array of things to kill you. Some are just star fodder, others can give you power-ups. It's a boss, alright. Next, goddammit, Kirby is picking beef with the sun and the moon. Think of the collateral damage. You fight one at a time, but if you don't beat the current boss, they just switch. While you're fighting the sun, the moon shoots stars at you. Stop! I used that joke last time. which is swallowed, will give you the cutter ability, for reasons I guess. Oh, maybe because the cutter looks like a crescent moon maybe? I don't know. And when you're fighting the moon, the sun fires. Holy shit, it's the orbital disintegration cannon. Hey, have any of you seen Redline? That movie kicks so much ass. You should watch it. Hell, it's on YouTube. Stop watching this video and go watch it right now. Go watch it, you piece of sh. And the star resulting from said beam will give you fire, which both copy abilities are quite useful for both bosses. It's not even funny how fast you body them. Krakow starts off as Krakow Jr., and you have to ascend cloud platforms while he's hunting your tail. You can either float like a normie, or grab the Chad jump ability and use it for both ascension and attacking the full-grown Krakow. He will shoot lightning and fly around, but again with the high jump, it won't be an issue. The heavy mole messes with the arena. It's an auto-scroller where you have to fight him while he digs and changes the terrain. He can even make pits for you to fall in like a dumbass. The wind blows. The sun sets. The orange sky as a background. And there's only the soil as the witness of the duel between you and your rival. Only the fastest, lightest blade shall prevail. This is how rival battles work in other games, but here it's a crapshoot. Meta Knight can kinda be considered a rival. He sometimes appears to make you fight his minions, but he also will throw you an invincible candy once in a while, so maybe he's just testing Kirby? Anyway, the fight is fun, but also kinda messy. I'm more interested in someone like Meta Knight. I mean, he's supposed to be calm and honorable. Hell, he won't even fight you until you pick up his sword. Well, screw him, man, I'm hungry. I'm gonna go do something to fill my void. From the camera now, here is the finished product. Might not look like it, but it's delicious. Just great. I think he's probably still waiting for me. Next up is the one and only King DDD. With his hammer he can jump and hit you, or he can inflate, give you a taste of your own medicine and swallow you, jump really high and do a stomp. He's a pretty fun boss to end the game on. Kirby, you dumbass. Now we get to the section where you use a Star Rod in a semi-shoot-em-up fight against that one angel from Evangelion. You gotta avoid projectiles and they'll sometimes fly around. It's not the hardest, but you sorta have a time limit, because if you take too long to beat it, you'll get crushed between the screen boundary and the floor. Flying to the moon for the final boss, who reveals his final form, the Nightmare. Now you know that shtick about how Kirby games start all bright and cheerful and by the end you fight some HP Lovecraft monster? Yeah, that started here. He can only be damaged if you shoot him with a Star Rod when he uncloses his bottom half. It's a surprisingly climactic boss, with the set and the music especially complementing it. With the Nightmare defeated and 25% less moon, Kirby returns victorious to Dreamland. Text revealing that King DDD wasn't just skinny dipping in the fountain. Oh wait, I'm narrating. Kirby fought to find the Star Rod, but King DDD did not mean any harm. Bad dreams had invaded Dreamland. A nightmare came into the dream spring and tried to cause pain to the people. DDD foiled the nightmare by hiding the star rod from him. DDD helped Kirby beat the nightmare. Now everyone's dreams will return. Tonight, Dreamland will sleep well. So that's Kirby's Adventure on normal, because this game has a hard mode, but it's nothing to write home about. Instead of actually changing aspects to make the game naturally harder through design, Sakurai grabbed some scissors and did a little of this. Bam! I have a health bar. Okay, I guess there are worse ways to make a hard mode. Everything's the same except you have to practice more caution, but it's also a bit lazy. It's there if you want a more difficult game. Aside from the main game, there are a few sub-games, 3 to be exact, which are Crane Fever, Egg Catcher, and Quick Draw. Crane Fever is like real crane machines. It's bullshit. You have to catch either small or large Kirbys to get lives. It's very simple and kind of a crapshoot, but that's just like real life crane machines. Egg Catcher has you eating the eggs King DDD throws at you while avoiding the bombs. What? It's simple but kinda tricky. It's the one I forget its existence the most. And Quick Draw is, well, just to see who reacts the fastest. You have to press a button as fast as possible to beat your opponent. It's simple but also very strict once you win a few rounds. I have never seen the end of the minigame, it's just too strict. These minigames can be accessed in the hub or in the menu if you get 100% completion, which is nice. It's a distraction, and the extra lives can come in handy, at least in hard mode. Getting 100% completion also gives you Versus Boss, which is a very simple and bare boss rush. You can only get the abilities that bosses can drop and no heal items. I guess it's a challenge, but I didn't find any reason to complete it for this video. Oh, and you get a sound test for completing hard mode, which is also nice. I don't know, I think I've said what I want to say about the original Kirby's Adventure. Truth be told, I have a favorite between the two versions I'm talking about in this video. One that I have a lot more experience playing, which isn't a knock towards Kirby's Adventure, and more of a product of my own bias. Because there's a difference between playing a game that you played when you were 17, and one that you played when you were 9. Now, if you're more interested in playing the original Kirby's Adventure, well, nowadays you can just play it on Nintendo Switch Online, but I do recommend you play the 3DS version. Now, during the lengthy production of this video, I managed to snag myself a 2DS, so I could try this version of the game. It is part of the 3D Classics line of 3DS games, which were basically like enhanced versions of old-ass NES games. These games were actually reconstructed from the ground up, if I'm not mistaken, and they also utilized the 3D gimmick of the 3DS. Now, since it's a 2DS, I don't know how it works for Kirby. You know, I have my brother's 3DS, but I really don't want to try it, and I don't think it matters that much. Like, if you're gonna play this game, you're not playing it because it's 3D. It's because it's Kirby's Adventure with an actual consistent frame rate. Yes, this game, the biggest improvement it has over the original NES game, is just the game always runs smooth like butter. It doesn't matter how many sprites there are, it will always run consistently. And if you played Kirby's Adventure in its original state, it's not unplayable. Obviously, it's still a good game. But the frame rate kinda, I don't know man, it's just smoother frame rate, so I don't see why you wouldn't play this, honestly. The only caveat is that it's only on 3DS, and I do wish they would port it to more recent consoles, like charge $7 for it. People don't care about the 3D, just put it on the Nintendo eShop and that's it. Now you can also configure some of the controls. It doesn't have any gameplay additions, it doesn't include any extra content, it's just Kirby's Adventure, but it has a better frame rate, and I think that alone makes it the best version of the original NES game. So if you have a 3DS, or I don't know if Citra can play it, probably, if it were alive now, but if you want to play Kirby's Adventure and you just want the best version, like I said, 3DS version is the way to go. It's just Kirby but a little bit better. About 9 years after Kirby's Adventure, unless you're in Australia, poor schmucks, the Game Boy received a remake of the game, a very faithful one when it comes to remakes. And probably one of my favorite looking Game Boy Advance games. And not to discredit its library, it can make a lot of games look real nice and sometimes having better looking assets than its spiritual home 16-bit predecessor. But from the sometimes laggy, flickery 8-bit sprites, it comes right out of the gate with smoother, nicer looking sprite than either the original or its other predecessors, aside from debatedly Dreamland 3 for its art style. The art style is more defined, and without using too much of my 2024 hindsight, it's a more familiar look than any of the games before. Kirby looks great and his animations are like 16-bit butter, as do the enemies, and this improves controls too, making the action snappier with improved frame rate. The backgrounds now have a more photorealistic, pre-rendered look. This in my opinion makes the world more defined while also keeping a bit of the dream aesthetic. I think it looks nice. Visually, the only change that's probably inferior is the box art. The original has a cool box art. I like it. The remake just has a random asset of Kirby and Meta Knight in the background, which is weird because he's only a boss that appears once or twice before you fight him. Maybe this was meant as a reference to the game mode that's actually kinda hidden to any non-completionist player? Or maybe just to make the cover art look cooler. Japanese cover. Fox though. The soundtrack goes from 8-bit chiptunes to crusty ass GBA sounds. I really like the soundtrack, but while I probably remember the melodies, it still isn't the greatest soundtrack of all time. As the gameplay goes, while there are changes that make this, in my opinion, a better game, it's still a pretty faithful remake of an NES game. I guess as a compliment to Kirby's Adventure, considering that its core design still holds up after nearly a decade at the time of the remake. The biggest missed chance in this game is that they didn't add the Kirby Superstar moveset. It still isn't a big deal though. I don't like getting too much hindsight with these older games unless it's necessary. I feel like picking on a game for omitting something that, maybe it couldn't do at the time or just didn't go with design goals. Besides, it's extremely easy to critique a 30 to 20-year-old game with the knowledge we have now. Imagine critiquing the original Sin and Punishment because it wasn't the hardest hitting action game ever made. Like imagine doing this on N64. Maybe I like treasure games. I should make a Gunstar Heroes video. It made sense that the original didn't have this. Yes, it could have technically been done, I guess. The needed inputs are there, but it's the first game to have copy abilities. It's hard to explain an idea's full potential first time around, made by a young director like Sakurai. But in this game, post Superstar, where the improved copy ability system was introduced, it's not a game breaker, but definitely a missed opportunity not to add it. Sure, it would break the game, but maybe you could have a classic and remix mode? Something to think about. Really, the biggest improvement to the core game is the slightly improved control. It's a lot smoother due to the improved frame rate and overall better animations. Everything just feels snappier and more responsive. The game definitely plays better without breaking the game completely. This turns an already fast-paced platformer compared to its Italian sewage dweller contemporary, especially for a handheld game. In its core, nothing is really changed aside from aesthetics, except for the turtle boss being swapped by the elephant, which used to kick my ass. I still find it the hardest middle boss, but it's not that bad. Fuck this guy. The minigames have changed too. Now instead of the original lineup, we have brand new ones. Quick Draw, Bomb Rally, and Air Grind. Quick Draw is just a reskin, based on the samurai theme from Kirby Superstar. It still requires a good amount of reflexes, so I've never actually beaten it. Bomb Rally is hot potato with ballistics, and when one of the Kirbys gets blown up, it's replaced by the ball enemy thingamajig, making it less predictable where the bomb will go. And Air Grind, probably inspired by the then in development Kirby Air Ride, the only racing game that can rival F-Zero. I mean, City Trial is fucking baller, dude. Anyway, you have to press A to go faster, and then release it and press it again in time to gain a boost from the spikes. Don't have the timing completely down, but it's still my favorite sub-game. The other biggest addition to the remake would be Meta Nightmare. In the original, the reward for beating the game 100% on hard mode is a sound test, but in the remake it's already unlocked, so you instead unlock Meta Nightmare in the sub-games menu. One thing I forgot to mention is that now hard mode lets you save, unlike the original hard mode. Instead, a marathon no save mode is reserved for Meta Knight. He plays a bit differently. He can swallow enemies, so your only method of attack is his trusty sword. Admittedly, it's a bit more robust than his standard sword ability, with an upward, downward, and forward dash attack. His control is also a bit different. He can run faster and has higher vertical speed at the cost of less horizontal speed. And his momentum when you start flying, it's like just a slow flight, which doesn't feel that good. Overall, I say he's a fun extra. It's really cool to play as him, but sometimes control is pretty slippery, and I find myself dying a lot. That could also be because of my recklessness. And since you can play sub-games to get extra lives, well, lives are less expendable, I find. But come on, man, can we have Meta Knight parrying a bomb like it's ultra kill? It's a good first inclusion, but I definitely think it has a lot of room for improvement in future games. Wink wink. Story presentation? The core plot hasn't changed, it's still the simple platformer story. I like the illustrations more, I generally dug the UI more. It's reminiscent of Smash and later Kirby Air Ride, but I'm rambling at this point. I really like the illustrations, thanks to the more modern art style. The ending cutscene is slightly changed, but it's still the basic gist. Miss the big eyes though. If anything, I think the final boss is much more climactic due to the visuals, since he's bigger and a bit more imposing, but also because of the track that's less 8-bit. Kirby beats the Nightmare like always, with a very similar ending to the NES version. This feels warm, and not because the weather has been absolutely infernal lately, but it's just like a warm blanket. Like watching a movie you love in a dark room, eating your favorite food, or being with your favorite person. This game feels cozy. It's a game I've revisited countless times, only rivaled by probably Metroid Fusion and Dread. Yeah, it's kind of an odd shift. I know to suddenly talk about how I feel about the game, but really, this video is how I can describe it best. Nightmare in Dreamland is a faithful and direct remake. It's of the good but unremarkable variety. It's closer to a Metroid Prime Remastered than a Zero Mission if I'm being honest. And I think the remakes that follow are somewhat similar but break the mold a bit more. At least Superstar Ultra does. Since I discussed the original, honestly there's not as much to talk about aside from the additions like sub-games and Meta Nightmare. It's not as interesting on its own as other remakes, but I still find it an overall better game with a few small changes it brings. Not to say that the original Kirby's Adventure is an outdated game that gets replaced completely. There is more merit in playing the NES original aside novelty, the same way you play the original Metroid or Zelda. It's a genuinely good game and kind of been a lot more kind to it than other games of its time, but I still have a preference, thanks to quite a bit of bias. I've played this game for a very long time, since I was young and at school. I mentioned this in my previous Kirby video, but I played this a lot on My Boy, a GPA emulator for Android, and that has been a play for a lot of playthroughs. I just find it a really easy game to revisit. It's not very long and it has a brisk pace. Is it my favorite game to replay? Not necessarily. Is it the best Kirby game? I find there are games that do some things better, and I do have a favorite, but that's for another day. It's just that Kirby exudes a certain coziness, shared by a lot of the games. It's a simple series to enjoy, maybe too simple for some players, but you have to enjoy sometimes a piece of media that just makes you feel good, you know? And Kirby does that the best out of any game I've played. I don't know, I don't play farming games or pit sims, maybe Panel de Pom falls into that. That game's pretty cool. Man, it's just so nice to play Kirby. There, that's the thesis. Game good because game fun. And also, I have a lot of fondness for it, if you couldn't tell. I really like the game. I remember in grade school playing it on an old Alcatel phone. I think they threw it away. Can't find it for the life of me. Anyway, it was so old it wasn't multi-touch. You can only press the D-pad and a single button at a time. It was harder to play other games, but Kirby's simplicity made it quite playable compared to Metroid Fusion and Zero Mission. I remember I was clear lying on the floor one night after school, behind an old CRT. It was quiet and the floor was cold, and it was there after many attempts because my 10-year-old self was even worse at video games than I am now. After many save states, I finally defeated Nightmare. It felt good, like overcoming a big obstacle, like getting to a high point on a bike on the mountains. It was nice to have something cozy to go back to. Most of my favorite games are ones that I go back to a lot, and hell, it isn't even my favorite Kirby game. Up there, but not quite. And that's a bridge I'll cross when I get to it. Not today, though. I have taken enough of your time for one day. Good night, and may we meet again another time, please.